Staying connected matters. That's why AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they'll proactively make it right. That's the AT&T Guarantee. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee for details. AT&T. Connecting changes everything.
Joseph Goldstein, Sam Harris, welcome back to the show.
Great to see you both.
Preparing both of you for this conversation has been like negotiating the Dayton Accords. So let's start with the subject of non-duality. And I'm going to tee this up for a second. Sam and I have talked about non-duality on this show. I think it's such an important issue. It's great to revisit it. Joseph, I don't think you and I have really gotten into it in such a big way. What do you mean when you use the term non-duality? And I guess as an add-on, what does it matter to the rank and file meditator?
And one of the things that came out of our endless back and forths about this, both this conversation and this topic, I took a little deeper dive into really researching how this term non-duality has been used. And I was kind of surprised in a way, although a little bit familiar with it, that it really can refer to several different things. And so it does feel important first to understand the different ways that the term non-duality can be used, and then to define how we're using it in any particular context. Just one other kind of footnote. When I was looking at the different meanings of it, I was struck by the fact that some meanings really cross traditions. That in all the Theravada, in Mahayana, Vajrayana, some of the meanings of non-duality can be found, the same one can be found in all of them, and other meanings of non-duality are really specific to particular traditions. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and perhaps one of the reasons for some confusion, because if we're not really precise about how we're using the term, then it's going to be hard to have conversations about it with anyone. So these are there were, I think, around 4 or 5 different meanings, or how the term non-duality was used. One that is kind of uncontroversial, and it's really quite limited, I think, in the Theravada tradition. One of the ways it's used. There are other meanings of non-duality in the tradition also. But one of them is just the non-duality of the unified mind in absorption, in jhana practice. Where there's that unification. In the absorption, it could be like the infinite space or infinite consciousness, and a total unification in that. Then,
when you say absorption and jhana, what does that mean?
Okay, so in the Theravada tradition and in the early Buddhist suttas, the Buddha makes a lot of reference to the development of deep states of concentration. And there's a series of ascending levels of absorption where the mind is unified on a single object. So it's the fact that it's unified on a single object that it could be expressed as being non-dual in that state. And jhana is just the Pali word for these different states of deep absorption or unification of mind. Yeah, so that's the basic meaning of it. This meaning of non-duality, I think, is very straightforward, and other traditions don't give that much importance to jhana as part of the practice, this level of samadhi. So I just wanted to mention this. This is not really the one that's most interesting to me. So a few of the other meanings or ways the term is being used across traditions is the non-duality between existence and non-existence, right? So that duality is collapsed in the understanding that one can say or claim things to be either existent or non-existent, and that's reflected in the law of dependent origination, that everything arises out of conditions and passes away. So to say things are existent doesn't acknowledge the continual passing away of things, and to say things are non-existent doesn't acknowledge the arising. So dependent origination just collapses that dichotomy. And so that's one way the term non-dual is being used, with reference to the duality of existence and non-existence. Okay, so this, it's a little bit technical, but I've come across that a lot in teachings in various traditions. Another meaning of non-duality, and this is really specific to particular traditions, does not cross over, the non-duality of samsara and nirvana, right? Which is a very common expression in Mahayana and Vajrayana teachings. And it's based on a certain metaphysics of what nirvana means in those traditions. In Theravada, the distinction between nirvana and samsara is very definitive, because the meaning of nirvana is different in that tradition than in the later ones. So non-duality here is the non-duality of samsara and nirvana, but it's very tradition specific, that particular meaning.
Can you define Mahayana, Vajrayana, Samsara, and Nirvana?
Okay.
And Theravada.
You have a couple of hours?
Yes. Well, your question is samsara.
Yeah, well, there.
Good point, Sam.
Wait. Sam, I thought our implicit deal was any abuse verbally was going to be directed at Joseph.
Yeah.
No,
My bad.
You can abuse Dan. That's okay.
Okay. I already have -1 point. I'm keeping score.
The teachings all began with the historical Buddha, who lived somewhere around between 500 and 400 BCE. And after his death, and over many centuries, the teachings transformed and evolved and changed in different ways. So Theravada is the name of one of the early traditions of the teachings. It means path of the elders. But then as Buddhism spread, Mahayana was a later development in the teachings, and it began to emphasize the bodhisattva ideal, that is, practicing for the attainment of Buddhahood, in the sense of really practicing to attain the Buddha mind. All of this, it's footnotes to everything I'm saying now. So, but I'm trying to just give, an overarching thing. So Theravada was an earlier expression of the teachings. Mahayana came later. And after that, when Buddhism was brought to Tibet, another whole tradition developed of Vajrayana, which we know mostly now through Tibetan Buddhism. And that includes many different kinds of practices, but one that we've talked a lot about are the Dzogchen practice and Mahamudra practice, which are quite explicitly expressed as non-dual traditions. So I don't know if does that cover what you were hoping for, Dan?
Yes, absolutely. It did leave out samsara and nirvana, and I know that's a particularly tricky, as a deceptively simple or complex question, actually, because the definitions of samsara and nirvana are different, as you referred to, depending on the tradition. But can you just give us a brief overview?
Yeah. So in the Theravada tradition, samsara refers to all conditioned phenomena, everything that arises because of causes, and therefore impermanent, kind of unreliable because everything's impermanent, and selfless. So samsara is just every aspect of our experience, including awareness. Because in Theravada, awareness itself, consciousness itself, is seen as dependently arising, as a conditioned phenomena. In Theravada, nirvana is that reality, and it's been referred to with a lot of different, I don't know if epithets is the right word, unborn, unformed, uncreated, unfabricated, a lot of uns in it. But the key point in understanding different traditions is that in this notion of nirvana, it transcends awareness, it transcends consciousness. In the later traditions, I'm going to allude to something which is going to lead to another definition of the non-dual. But for example, in Dzogchen, which is part of the Vajrayana tradition, non-duality refers to the inseparable unity of clarity, or the knowing aspect of mind, awareness, the inseparable unity of awareness and emptiness. And nirvana is seen as being the recognition of that unity, and samsara is described as that delusion of not seeing that unity. So in that way of understanding, the quality of awareness is seen as unconditioned, an unconditioned awareness, which has this clarity aspect of knowing, but also its empty aspect, insubstantial, selfless, can't be found, and yet the knowing is there. And so that's the basic difference in the understanding of samsara and nirvana. In the earlier tradition, nirvana transcends awareness. In the later traditions, awareness itself can be experienced as the ultimate reality.
I can imagine at this point in the conversation, some of the folks that I'm describing as kind of rank and file meditators might be thinking, what does this matter to me? I'm just trying to be less stressed, less owned by my emotions.
Yes.
I'm prepared to weigh in on that, but Joseph, you didn't get to your final definition of non-duality.
Great.
So you need to land the plane.
I'm glad you're keeping track.
Yeah.
You're paying attention. Good.
This is...
So the last one, the last definition of non-duality, which in some way may be the most relevant as we begin to look at how it impacts, just us as practitioners. And that is the non-duality as being the non-separation of observer and observed. So the dualistic perception would be there's an observer and then that which is observed, right? And seeing that duality. So one meaning of non-duality is the collapse of that subject-object distinction. And this meaning of non-duality can be found across traditions. And this is the one that I think we might unpack as having, impact in how we're living in the world and how we're experiencing things. But just to end, this is the end of my rap. But to respond to that question, which I think is fundamental to this whole discussion, is what does it matter? Right? Sam and I and you have rather philosophic minds. So, we can get into this just for the joy of the discussion of it. But in terms of, for just a practitioner who just wants to have a little more ease in their lives, I think the bottom line in all the traditions is coming to the end of suffering, and what alleviates suffering in our minds, in our lives, and to see whether any of the things I mentioned or how they would contribute to the end of suffering or not. But I think for me, anyway, that's the bottom line. That's the point of it all. It's not about some philosophic view apart from does it alleviate suffering or not. So again, for me, that is really the fundamental question as we discuss duality, non-duality, and anything else we might get into.
Today's episode is brought to you by Fabletics. I was working out this morning in my Fabletics. I had actually been thinking a lot lately about the fact that I work out all the time, but my workout gear is just busted. And then Fabletics swooped in as an advertiser on this show, sent me a bunch of stuff, and now I look and feel great while I'm hitting the gym. But this is not just about stuff to wear in the gym. If you're like me and you live in active wear, you really can never have enough of this stuff. But the good stuff usually costs a fortune, which is why I'm really into Fabletics now. I get pieces that feel premium and perform like the expensive brands without the crazy price tag. Becoming a Fabletics VIP is simple. When you sign up as a new VIP, you get 80% off everything. And after that, the membership is about $60 a month unless you skip. That monthly fee gives you exclusive membership benefits, including a credit you can use toward a full outfit or bundle up to $100. On the first of every month, they send you an email and you decide if you want to purchase a member credit or just skip the month. The cool part is that member credit isn't just for you. You can use it to grab something for your partner or your friend or whoever. The fit and feel are totally dialed in. No waistbands rolling down, joggers that actually keep their shape, jackets that are warm without the bulk. It solves many of the issues I've had historically with activewear while still being soft, breathable, and durable enough for workouts, travel, or everyday wear. They're not just about good deals, they're also doing the eco-friendly stuff. Half of their fabrics are made from recycled materials, and the company has been carbon neutral since 2021, which I think is awesome. Treat yourself to gear that looks good, feels good, and doesn't break the bank with Fabletics. Go to fabletics.com/happier and sign up as a VIP and get 80% off everything. That's fabletics.com/happier. Few things feel better than knowing someone's looking out for you. That is the spirit behind the AT&T Guarantee. Staying connected matters. That's why AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they will proactively make it right. That's the AT&T Guarantee, because connection should be dependable, especially in the moments that matter most. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee for details. AT&T, connecting changes everything.
Yeah, I agree with that last part, certainly, that is the fundamental question. Actually, Joseph, I have a question for you about the traditions, though. Is it your understanding that the radical disjunction between nibbana and samsara in the Theravada tradition is throughout the tradition, or does it change as you go, let's say, from the Burmese Mahasi Sayadaw construal of it to something like the Thai forest tradition, or are they dealing with precisely the same Abhidhamma claims and the same view?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, Sam. Within Theravada, there are many lineages within the tradition. Theravada is the kind of Buddhism practiced in Sri Lanka, in Burma, in Thailand, Cambodia, and then Vietnam is some mix in Mahayana and Theravada. So the Thai view, I think, is closer to some respects to the Dzogchen view, because some of the Thai forest teachers do talk about an unconditioned awareness. I don't know how, because I'm not intimately familiar with that tradition. I don't know the range of understandings that are contained within it. So I'm just familiar really with a few teachers, in that. But within that view of the Thai forest tradition, I don't think it would be in accord with classical Theravada teachings. Now, somebody in the Thai forest tradition who's really, experienced in it might take issue with that statement, and so when I say the classical teachings, I guess I'm basing it on kind of the Sri Lankan view, the Burmese view, but even, as you know, there's this really quite brilliant German monk in the Theravada, not in the Theravada tradition, immersed in what he calls early Buddhism, right? So really just going back to the Pali Suttas and not any of the later commentaries. So he distinguished himself from Theravada.
You're talking about Analayo or?
Analayo, yeah. And that's why he refers to it as early Buddhism, even before the development of Theravada. Mm-hmm. And he also would say that Thai view is not classical based on the suttas. However, I've read, from really, wonderful teachers in the Thai forest tradition of how they try to base that understanding of an unconditioned awareness with sutta references. So we might say there's some controversy here. But for the most part, I would say that distinction is characteristic of Theravada.
Well, so a couple things to say. One is I'm not especially interested in the metaphysics. I think I share Joseph's bias here that it really is all about suffering and the end of suffering and what works and what helps and how people can recognize what is available in the present moment so as to experience that difference between suffering and the end of suffering. My interest in the metaphysics extends, however, to the I think the empirical fact that each of these views is in some important respect self-confirming, which is to say, if you hold one, you really can practice in such a way as to seem to discover that it is in fact true. And that has certain consequences with respect to this question of, what is sufficient to relieve suffering, right? So in my view, you can suffer quite unnecessarily with the dualistic view and and yet all the while seem to validate it and ramify it based on your moment-to-moment experience of mindfulness, right? And I believe I have some experience doing that, about which I've complained for years, and Joseph has been quite hard-hearted and judgmental of my complaints, which you should look into. Talk to your rabbi.
Number two, Sam.
Okay, back to the high wire. So my the kind of the energy that you sometimes hear from me in debating Joseph on this topic is coming from this sense of urgency around the difference between suffering and the end of suffering that is to be realized by resolving this debate in favor of non-duality.
What definition of non-duality are you using here? This is where it gets confusing.
Yeah, I'll definitely get there. But one more point about the metaphysics, or about just the difference in this view, or I guess this is one species of non-duality that you just mentioned, Joseph. The reason why a non-dual construal of samsara and nirvana makes sense, I think it should make sense to you just logically, is that clearly in every tradition there is, and certainly this is true, within the Burmese construal of the Theravada, is that it's possible to be an arhat or to be a Buddha in samsara, with your eyes open, teaching the Dharma and talking to people and eating lunch and making decisions and obviously experiencing the full range of phenomenal existence, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, moment by moment. There has to be a way to do that that's compatible with the freedom of an arhat or a Buddha, right? So what is that?
Yes.
What is that state? And is it possible to recognize that directly, right?
Yeah.
And so the dualistic schools, and the non-dualistic schools like Dzogchen and Mahamudra, but even outside of the Buddhist tradition, I mean, the Advaita tradition in India generally, that goes nominally in the bin of Hinduism. And you can add Zen to this and a bunch of other lineages. They all seem to agree that it's possible to recognize the mind of the Buddha, the open-eyed mind of the Buddha, directly, right? That it's available now, and that in some sense it's coincident with what people are mistaking for their ordinary dualistic consciousness, which is to say, if you're just sitting there reading your email in a dualistic, samsaric, entangled frame of mind, it's possible to have that same experience of reading your email as a Buddha would have that experience, or as an arhat, or as an enlightened being would have that experience. You have to find that specific orbit in your conscious mind, or you have to find that kind of you have to cease to do something that is obscuring that way of seeing in this next moment, and you can do that without turning the lights out, without going elsewhere, without schlepping up the mountain from the base, without doing lots of work. It is in fact coincident with your experience in this moment, and there's an act of misperception, a kind of false cognition, an illusion that is present that has to be cut through. And so there's a reason to, I would just say, kind of theoretically, or just on the basis of no experience, just a priori, there's a reason to think that would be the case, because all these traditions claim that it's totally possible to be a Buddha who drives a car, right, or walks across the street without getting run over, and obviously that Buddha is seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and touching, right? So, but as far as the non-dual, so all your three definitions of non-duality, leaving aside jhana, all sort of collapse into the last one in my experience, and in what I believe is in fact the view of Dzogchen, which is to say that when you overcome this false distinction, this illusory distinction between subject and object, in the moment of experience, right? So you're seeing, the full contents of your visual field. There's this sense of there being a seer and the things seen. If you look into that matter closely enough in the way that would be recommended by a Dzogchen teacher, or really any of these other non-dual teachers, it's possible to recognize that dichotomy is false, and that what in fact exists is this open and inexpressible condition, which in Dzogchen is called Rigpa, which is their non-dual awareness. You can call it consciousness, you can call it awareness, but it's what you're, or you can call it emptiness, right? So, and those two designations, consciousness, awareness, Rigpa on the one side, or emptiness on the other, strike a slightly different emphasis. I mean, the consciousness and awareness is the first person character of it, like what it's like to be you. Emptiness is more the kind of third person descriptive character of what's left when you cease to divide reality into parts and into this basic subject object framing. And that's where it seems to me those three other definitions of non-duality kind of merge, because when you no longer have a sense that you're the subject and everything is still appearing, right? It's from the Dzogchen point of view, it's not true to say that it's now one thing. It's not this monistic fusing of everything. It's not a unity experience, although it's easy to see how people could kind of misdescribe it that way. Because it's not just one thing, because everything in all its diversity continues to appear, right? So it's not like you haven't been reduced to just kind of some
blob,
lack of intelligence where you can no longer discriminate. If someone says, "Can you hear the bird?" Yes, you can hear the bird, and yet, hearing from the perspective of there being no one who hears, leaves a continuous, an open and inexpressible totality, which has a kind of paradoxical quality to it, right? So in some sense, a bird is not really a bird, right? So and this is where those other notions of emptiness come in a slightly different sense. So like the first one you gave, Joseph, was with respect to dependent origination, which is to assert the existence of something is to deny impermanence, and yet to deny its existence is to deny that it arose in the first place. So there's this kind of inscrutable non-duality there. I would change the emphasis a little bit and move it from impermanence to just the fact that this is more of like a Madhyamaka view of the situation. Things don't have an independent existence even when they're present in some basic sense, right? So like the borders of things are specified conceptually, and when you erode your hold on those concepts, you begin to see that the mountain isn't really quite a mountain, even though something something seems to be happening, right? So first there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is, but the then there is state, that final state, the non-dual version of it is you recognize that in some sense it's the mountain as though seen in a mirror, right? Like there's the reality of anything is provisional and is somehow emergent out of this totality of that is in fact inexpressible and is coincident with awareness. So
just, I want to stay with the pointy edge of the stick here in terms of what does this matter? How does this matter for a regular person? And I think what you said there was something to the effect of, if you can tap into what we're calling non-dual awareness, then you don't take your anger, your panic, whatever afflictive emotion so seriously, and therefore it is way less afflictive, maybe 0% afflictive.
Yes. So I'd like to bring in one other term here that Joseph is very fond of, because I think it will help us dissect the difference here if there's a difference exists. So Joseph often wants to say that all of this, everything we've just said, is just academic and of kind of secondary importance, because the real promise of the Dharma, the real practice, and the purpose toward which any one of these methods, whatever their metaphysical views, is applied, is non-clinging, right? Non-clinging is the practice, and that is what liberates the mind. And so, if the Dzogchen tradition and the Theravada tradition have a different view about what it takes to practice non-clinging, well, okay, but there's still where the rubber meets the road is, are you clinging or are you not? And that's the difference. Is that fair, Joseph? I mean, do you want to sign on the dotted line there, or
it might be helpful to say what clinging is,
right? Well, there I think we might find some difference of opinion. So that's part of the rub there. But so Joseph, just you feel free to respond to that. But I would love to complete the thought about how this relates to the difference between the two views.
I would ascribe to that, but it would take some further explanation of why. And one of the difficulties which I'm beginning to notice in the conversation is that you have a young brain and can remember everything.
Not so young.
And I have an old brain, and there were a lot of points you made, and each one I wanted to respond to.
This is, look at this polite way of saying that I'm long-winded. Yes. Sam, you clearly like the sound of your own voice. All right. So let me just give you something very punctate to respond to. So as to not overly tax your
No. Well, there are a few
memory.
points I want to make.
Okay, go for it. Well, I do think this will sharpen things up. So if let's agree that clinging is really, if it's not the only important thing, it's among the most important things. It's really kind of at the center of the bullseye of what we're talking about here, however we define it. And I would say that it is possible to have a view of clinging that is dualistic, that allows you to practice in a way where it seems like you're not clinging, and in fact you're no longer clinging, on the basis of this view. And yet you're still perceiving reality dualistically, right? So, and maybe an analogy would help here. So there's this classic analogy, and I'm not even sure it's Buddhist, it may just be Indian, but this classic analogy in the Dharma of mistaking a coiled rope for a snake, right? You see a coiled object in the corner of a room, you glance at it, and you think it's a snake, and then on further inspection, you realize it's a rope. Now, let's just, for the purposes of this analogy, let's have that be that realization, that cutting through illusion. That's the duality, non-duality illusion. So it's duality to think it's a snake, and it's, you recognize non-duality when you recognize that it's a rope, right? So it's not
wait. How does that follow?
Well, I'm just use that. I'm not saying that it's not a perfect analogy. Just go with me for a second here. It's possible to practice in such a way that you still think there's a snake over there, but you have achieved real equanimity about there being a snake over there, right? You're no longer experiencing aversion. You're no longer experiencing desire to get away. You're just, you really have a balanced mind, and yet you are still taken in by this underlying illusion that you're in the presence of a snake. And I would say that the same can be done with dualistic mindfulness, where you feel like there's this subtle division between subject and object. Consciousness is arising spontaneously and totally unencumbered by aversion or desire. You're noticing impermanence. And yet there's the snake, again, not a perfect analogy, but the snake that is present here is this sense of subject-object separation. Again, the reason why this matters is that it can seem to be self-confirming, right? And you can maintain this orbit for quite some time, at least in my experience. And yet yet the clinging is gone. What we're calling clinging in this case is the desire for experience to be any other way than it is, right? You're not pushing the unpleasantness away. You're not grasping at the pleasantness. There's no the emotional tone of what I'm calling clinging, the contraction in the face of unpleasantness and the graspiness in the place of pleasantness, that has been relaxed, and yet duality remains. That, in my view, is a problem. A serious problem, but the first claim is just that is possible.
First, to say that a lot of what you said I agree with, and I don't see actually that much difference, and with some of the things you said, and some of the others not. So there are a few points that just I'm remembering from the beginning, of what you were saying. In terms of your example of, of course, the Buddha is living in the world, right? And seeing, hearing, smelling. So contrasting that to the Theravada view is missing one point of the different ways nirvana is described in Theravada. So one meaning of it is the cessation of the defilement. So the Pali word for defilement, unwholesome states, is kilesa. So it's called kilesa nirvana because it's the eradication of the defilement. The other expression or manifestation of nirvana is within the tradition, Theravada tradition, is that experience where the very aggregates of existence are no longer there, which is, in that understanding, is what happens at the death of an arhat. And so there is the complete acknowledgement that the enlightened mind living in the world can live in the world in nirvana, so to speak, because it's referring to kilesa nirvana. There are no longer any causes in the mind to cause suffering. And so I'm in total agreement with you that, of course, the enlightened mind can live freely, completely freely, in the world of conditioned phenomena. And nirvana just has those two different meanings. In terms of nirvana and samsara being the same or different, with kilesa nirvana, it's the same in terms of being free, because all the kilesas are absent. But they're not the same in terms of the skanda nirvana, which is the cessation of all the aggregates, and that's where the big distinction is.
But the distinction is with respect to methodology. So in your view, or in the Theravada view, it is necessary to keep experiencing skanda nirvana in order to ultimately get to kilesa nirvana.
No, just the opposite. Exactly the opposite.
Well, no, it actually goes both ways. But in your view, you need to have the lights out experience repeatedly in order to uproot the kilesas so that you can experience kilesa nirvana. And the way to get to the lights out experience is to rest in such equanimity that the mind can enter into it in the first place.
Yeah, to rest in equanimity, but this goes to another point of the collapse of the subject-object dichotomy. There are many examples of that aspect of non-duality, that collapse of subject-object distinction within Theravada, both classically and in modern times. So classically, the Bahaya Sutta really expresses it in the seen, just the seen, in the heard, just the heard, in the smell, known, just the known. And it's pointing to the absence of any subject there, of any self as subject. And so it's a very non-dualistic expression of understanding and of the path, of a path of practice. In more modern teachings, a la Joseph, there's one practice which I came to in my own practice, which really was transforming. And you've probably heard me give this little rap on the passive voice construction. And so, because the way we language things definitely conditions how we experience things. So if we're languaging things to ourselves in the active voice, I'm knowing a sound. The I is built right into there, right? And so it's going to be reflected very often in how things are experienced, unless there's some counter practice for that. What I found was relanguaging to myself in how I'm experiencing things in the passive voice, which would be sounds being known. In the passive voice, there's no self as subject. And in fact, I asked ChatGPT, what is the subject in the passive voice? If the I is not the subject, then what is the subject? And it was really interesting, and it confirmed my understanding.
Didn't say Hitler?
It said sounds becomes the subject, not the object. And so when we're experiencing things with that frame, that duality of separate subject and object disappears, and it's just things being known. And the knowing and what's being known are inseparable. And there's no I apart from it. And so the very thing you're talking about, I think, is also found within the Theravada teaching.
I'm just going to jump in again because, first of all, the passive voice practice has been massive for me personally. But I want you to articulate exactly why that non-dual experience that one can have by using the passive voice in practice matters.
Well, yeah, it matters for a lot of the reasons kind of Sam mentioned. First, it's effortless. Once I frame things in that way, it was totally effortless. It was just, so I started doing it in walking, but then it could be with anything. And as soon as I got my mind into that linguistic frame, you know, and at first I had to remind myself of it, but at this point it's just automatic. Things are being known effortlessly, spontaneously. Sounds, thoughts, and whatever is arising and being known, which, metaphysics aside, seems to me very resonant with the Dzogchen practice. It doesn't feel that different to me. Okay, that's one point. Another point, going to your question, or exploring a little bit more your question of why does this matter? Just an ordinary practitioner, what's the importance of this? I think it's important to ask, what is the cause of suffering that non-duality teachings, in the way you're describing, Sam, addresses?
Mm.
And because, okay, I'm gonna throw this in. It's something somebody just told me this, and I've come across it in different writings by Khyentse Rinpoche, also, who's a great Tibetan master, but Tsogni Rinpoche, who's a contemporary Dzogchen teacher. He was giving a retreat. I wasn't at the retreat, so this is somebody who was there told me about this exchange.
This is either better or worse than ChatGPT in terms of its authenticity.
Well, I'll just put it out. But if it was just that, I might have that degree of skepticism. But it reinforced what I've read very often. In fact, I think I sent this to you. So, although I have one email in my draft folder that I never sent to you.
An angry email?
No. So what I'm about to say might be in that email I never sent. But where Khyentse Rinpoche says, in awareness, there's no clinging. And if there's clinging, it's not awareness.
Yeah.
And so he's really pointing to, and so what Tsogni Rinpoche said, as I heard it, secondhand, he was asking a student on the retreat, well, why is Rigpa important? Which I think is, a very reasonable question. Why is, and they gave various answers, and he ended up saying, it's none of what you're saying. It's because in Rigpa there's non-clinging. And so I think it has a more essential part of the Dzogchen teachings than you give credit for.
Okay.
Well, no, just to be clear about this,
Sam, before you get into whatever.
I will not cling to the opportunity to talk, but this is the nub of it right here.
Okay, I will get back to it, but I want to stay with the why does this matter for a second, because Joseph, I don't think you really answered the question. On a very basic level, the ability to be aware of whatever's arising in our mind, especially if it's provoking unhappiness or suffering, without claiming it as ours, or even claiming the awareness of the thing as ours, is inherently and deeply freeing. Am I going in the right direction? And if so, can you just say a little bit more about that before I let Sam come in and do whatever violence he's going to do?
I think one of the problems may be, because I was thinking about this. One thing I have to thank you for, Sam, is all your comments do inspire a lot of reflection. So it makes me think about these things more than I probably would otherwise. So in some way, I've been talking about clinging as the cause of suffering, and therefore it's experiences of non-clinging, which is the end of suffering. However, in a technical sense, clinging has one very kind of specific connotation. There are other qualities in the mind that also are creative of suffering, that express a slightly different aspect. So, for a few examples, the quality in the mind of, in Pali, the term used is mana. It's translated as conceit, but conceit in this sense, the fundamental meaning of it is the feeling or sense of I am. In a wide variety, we could think of it as I am over time. I was this in the past, I'll be doing this in the future. If there's some sense of an I am in there, that's conceit, and that's a contraction. That's a source of suffering. So technically, conceit and clinging are two different things. Right? But when I'm referred to non-clinging, I'm really talking about it not so much in the technical Abhidhamma definition, which is a very specific way of relating to things. I'm including in it things like clinging, desire,
To self.
grasping, conceit, to anything. But conceit is the I am. Wrong view is the belief in a self. Craving is the sense of this belongs to me. So each of these...
I think we can add one more piece, which seems to be related here. I mean, you can talk about it separately, but it does seem to be attached to the same erroneous cognition, which is identification with thought.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
The sense that this thought is me,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Joseph, you've just stumbled upon, I think, the core truth of Dzogchen, which, in my view, the only real difference between clinging and non-clinging that you need to consider is the difference between duality and non-duality, right? I mean, it's cutting through dualistic clinging. It's cutting through dualistic fixation, to use the common Dzogchen phrase, that unties all these knots, right? And then this is what Khyentse Rinpoche was saying. If he did in fact say that if it's awareness, there's no clinging. If there's clinging, there's not awareness, meaning rigpa, meaning non-dual awareness. If you cut in through the knot of dualism, untangles all these things. I'm glad you brought in mana, conceit, which is because that's just another shading of the same illusion, which is the sense of that I am the same subject that was here a moment ago or last year. But so it really is that is the. So this is why it's a little question begging to say it's all a matter of clinging, without really defining what you mean by clinging. From the Dzogchen side, the root clinging really is in this subject-object dichotomy that is cut through in recognizing Rigpa. And then all of this is resolved, and it is from that view and in that experience, an experience of what you're calling Kilesa Nibbana. And this is where some of the paradoxes of the Vajrayana view also come in. That's true even in the presence of kilesa, right? Like, so let's say you feel a moment of anger, right? Or aversion, which is testifies to your unenlightenment, certainly from the Theravada view. But that moment of anger recognized, right, becomes the same non-dual openness and emptiness and great perfection. And the crucial bit is that that's true even before the physiology of anger has dissipated, right? And even like anger, like so this these weird tantric phrases you meet in Vajrayana teaching, like anger dawns as wisdom, right? How is that anything other than just weird PR for this this hierarchical view? It's empirically true when you can experience it, when your mindfulness is such that you're recognizing anger as a mere expression of the totality of emptiness from a non-dual point of view. What I would argue, and this is why it matters, Dan, is that it's possible to practice in a dualistic way such that you're noticing anger mindfully, and your mindfulness then appears to be this sort of remedial, provisional, gradually cultivating practice, which is not revealing to you in that moment the utter freedom that is compatible with emptiness and non-dual recognition. What it's revealing to you is this yet another moment of kind of balanced mediocrity, like balance, like you're trying not to be it's a vigil. The vigil continues. You're still waiting to get somewhere, even as you're balancing the factors of equanimity and this is the crucial bit for me, Joseph, is that either a moment of mindfulness is good enough or it isn't, right? And you can't fake it, right? You can't, you can hope it's good enough. You can wish it was good enough. You can say, but the question is it really good enough? Is it really a moment of freedom, or are you still waiting on some subtle level for your experience to change, to become enlightened, to get somewhere?
Yeah.
And so my question to you is, why isn't Kilesa Nibbana good enough, right? Like, if Kilesa Nibbana is really available in the next moment, you might doubt whether it is, but if you agree that it is, if your passive voice gets you to a recognizable experience of Kilesa Nibbana, wherein you don't find the evidence of your unenlightenment, even in the presence of anger that just arose the moment before, and now it's just this inscrutably empty display of energy. Why isn't it good enough to experience that Kilesa Nibbana in that next moment?
You know those moments when someone just takes care of something for you? That's what AT&T is doing with the AT&T Guarantee. Staying connected matters. That's why AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they will proactively make it right. That's the AT&T Guarantee. Because staying connected isn't optional, it's essential. And AT&T wants you to feel that somebody's got your back. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee for details. AT&T, connecting changes everything.
I think what he's saying is that most of us practice mindfulness, or many of us practice mindfulness in a way where anger might arise and we feel like the subject, the point of awareness, witnessing this anger separate from us in our consciousness in some way. And we might be able to reduce our suffering by breaking or by putting the anger through a cheese grater, like seeing that it manifests as rumbling in the chest, redness in the ears, starburst of self-righteous thoughts.
And no longer being identified with the thoughts that were making you angry, etc.
Correct. Yeah. But that is missing a crucial non-dual piece, which is to see, by separating yourself out and viewing it dualistically, you are missing an aspect of freedom that is not available in the way he's saying you teach, Joseph, as opposed to the way he teaches. How'd I do, Sam?
Yeah, I wouldn't have put that final invidious flourish on it, but you can take that as implied. The only other thing I would add is that you can't. You're condemned for that to be so. Everyone has to start where they start, right? And everyone starts from a dualistic place where they feel like they're a subject having to learn to meditate, and they want to get somewhere, and they're suffering. And so the dualism and the seeking and the distance of the goal is all implied by the very structure of the practice in the beginning. The unique capacity of a non-dual insight is that it obviates all of that, and then you can then practice the goal, so that there's no distance between you and the goal. And if there is a distance, if there's a seeming distance between you and the goal, you can't. I mean, that's just the way things seem, and then you're condemned to feel that way about each moment of awareness.
Okay.
And the goal in this, just to put a fine point on it, the goal in this context is back to this Bahia Sutta that Joseph referenced earlier.
That's one way of describing the experience. Yeah.
It's a classic. Just for the listener who might not remember it, is something the Buddha is said to have said in a so-called sutta, which is a teaching of the Buddha in the classical texts, where some guy named Bahia asked him about the nature of freedom, and he said something like, "In the seeing is just the seen, and the hearing is just the heard." So with the anger, it's just there's no me witnessing my anger; it's just anger angering. And there's an enormous amount of freedom in that because you don't need to take it so personally. And
well,
I think
even anger isn't even anger at that point, really. I mean, again, it's just a display of awareness or emptiness, depending on how you want to describe it. Again, I'm not putting. Let's not open the door to the crazy wisdom teachings and all the dysfunction that follows thereupon in Vajrayana Buddhism. So I'm not recommending that people not view anger as something to be avoided or mitigated, etc. All of that, all of that's fine as a matter of practice. I'm just saying that either a moment of mindfulness really delivers the goods of freedom, no matter what's happening, or it doesn't, or it's a method that you're applying to an otherwise problematic circumstance that is samsara, right? So, in my view, only non-dual mindfulness cashes the check of samsara and nirvana are one, right? Otherwise, you might believe that, but you're not experiencing that. And
okay,
and there's no reason to say that.
There's so much.
So much heresy. I hit you with buckets of heresy so that you, with your thimble, can just try to clean them up. Yeah.
I think it's really important to recognize that the goals are different. To use the frame of Dzogchen and non-duality as you're expressing it posits a certain understanding of what nirvana is.
Well, it need not, Joseph. It actually need not. We could leave all of the metaphysics and the views aside. I'm just talking about certain experiences are available in the present moment.
Yes,
and you're either having them or not.
Yes,
in the present moment.
Okay, I think it may have more important implications than, but I'll leave it aside for the moment. Just as in Dzogchen, where people are given the pointing out instructions, and and so they're beginning to practice non-dual awareness. That does not mean that people are actually experiencing it. And again, I think it was Sophie or maybe somebody else, you fake it till you make it. You keep practicing and, in this way and that way until you finally land at what it really means. But it's not like that understanding is immediately available necessarily. There will be some people for whom it is, but I would suggest that it's much rarer than you may believe, because it's possible to be approximating what's called Rigpa, but not really.
Okay, but let me just translate that back into my language, just because that's not a counterpoint to anything I would want to say, because in my language, that's just to say that some significant percentage of people try to practice Dzogchen and they fail, or they're not really, or they might say they're practicing it, but they're not. So there's an important difference there, and I would totally acknowledge that that's the case. But that's not Dzogchen practice. That's the failure mode of the Dzogchen teachings.
No, yeah. So I would say the same thing is true of the deeper understanding of mindfulness, and that what you're describing that people can be practicing mindfulness in a dualistic way, in the way you're talking about. But when you really get down to what mindfulness in its fullness or in its depth means, many people they're not practicing that. They're practicing mindfulness in the same way that people are practicing Dzogchen, but haven't really quite landed yet at the essential element of it. And it's the same thing with mindfulness. People often conflate recognition and mindfulness. So you're practicing, and anger, to use your example, moment of anger arises and we recognize it. We could name it anger, and we're experiencing it, in some way. But that recognition is not sufficient.
Right.
It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Mindfulness has a deeper dimension to it than just that. And one of the dimensions of it is the mind free in that moment, free of greed and hatred and delusion.
Yeah.
So it's just to say that in both practices, there's kind of an entry, a long runway to get to the place where we're actually practicing with the full experience or realization, either of what non-dual awareness is, using that phrase, or what mindfulness is, because in my experience, mindfulness properly practiced, in its fullness, is a non-dual practice, because the non-duality is the freedom from the subject-object dichotomy. That's one of the meanings of non-duality. And that comes at a certain point of understanding and development, as expressed in the Barre Sutta, as expressed in the passive voice construction.
But Joseph, you're ignoring all of the dualistic constructions that are even more canonical. I mean, just the fact that consciousness is considered to be this separately arising, impermanent, conditioned phenomenon
not separately arising.
Well,
dependently arising.
No, dependently arising, but it's separate from the thing that is known, right? So there's the sight and the consciousness that is arising.
No.
Well, there's the object. Consciousness knows its object.
So, I'm looking for a show and tell. Okay. So, do you see this?
I do.
It's a pad of paper.
What is it?
This is the point. This is like the flower for Mahakasapa.
Okay. So, what shape is this?
All right. This is it's a rectangle.
Yeah,
it looks gray.
Yeah,
on your camera. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
its grayness and its rectangleness are combined in the same instance.
Exactly. They're inseparable. You can't. The color has a shape and the shape has a color, but they're inseparable. So is that understanding? If you're highlighting the color or the shape, it will seem dualistic. If you're highlighting the inseparability, it's non-dual. And same thing with consciousness, the knowing and an object are inseparable.
The crucial difference from my point of view, as just a matter of practice and a matter of kind of psychological well-being, is the experience of mindfulness drawn right out of the Barre Sutta. So in the seen, just the seen, in the heard, just the heard, in the cognized, just the cognized, right? So that just this kind of radical evaporation of a sense that there is one who's doing anything or being mindful. Is that synonymous with every moment of mindfulness, even off retreat in one's ordinary life? Or is that some sort of peak experience that one achieves only by virtue of real continuity and stability and equanimity along the progressive insight far out there, sort of on the map?
No, no.
Can I field that one? Can I answer that one, Joseph, as your student?
Yes.
The passive voice practice can be done anytime, anywhere, whether you're meditating or not, no matter how strong your concentration is. Just for context, Sam referenced this earlier, but one of his historical beefs with the way Joseph teaches is that there's an aspect of you have to do this hard work, as Sam said before, like schlep up from the base of the mountain to the peak, at which point maybe you have a nirvana experience where the lights go out. But the passive voice practice is something you can do right here, right now. And if, for some, it's frustrating because some people, it doesn't click. But just for me, for example, it was just immediately obvious. Oh yeah, I'm walking down the hallway and things are being seen. Well, seen by what? And if you look for it, you won't find anything. And it's right there. It's immediate. It's not dependent upon spending 7 days on retreat.
Obviously, I'm not going to doubt any of that, because consciousness simply is this way and can be recognized this way. And if the passive voice technique works for you, well, then great, right? So, but again, the view, the problem, the sticking point for me is that the metaphysical view and the logic dictates a certain logic of the practice, right? And it is possible to practice by a certain logic and with a certain view. Again, might all be happening in the background all the time. It may never be explicit, right? You don't wake up in the morning on your 17th day of a 3-month retreat thinking again about the metaphysical view and thinking again about you're just being mindful. But the question is, what is available for you to notice in each moment of mindfulness? And if it's just non-dual suchness, then that's a certain experience. But if it's just more impermanence from this subtle point of view of kind of trying to build concentration and trying to get somewhere, it's a different experience. And it is a self-confirming experience. Again, you can have the experience where that's all there is to notice. And what I'm saying is that can extend to a very high level of concentration and continuity and real feelings of subjective freedom and equanimity. And in my experience, what's unique about the non-dual approach is that, again, not everyone can practice it. Not everyone has enough mindfulness to be successfully introduced to it. But if it works for you, what is revealed is that even in just the most ordinary moment of consciousness, the kind of radical freedom of subject-object delusion is available, right? It's like nothing has to change. It doesn't matter what happened a moment ago. And I would grant you, yes, that once you've recognized that, the passive voices is as good an indication as any, as a good a reminder as any to recognize that again. But until you've recognized that, it's very easy to feel that samsara and nirvana are radically different, right? And you wouldn't even know what to make of the claim that they're the same thing.
What is the basis of the subject-object distinction? The basis of it is an identification with consciousness as being self. It's identifying with consciousness. And that's what creates the duality. That's what creates the separation. The practice of vipassana, and it can be, it obviously is taught in many different ways. But I just want to reiterate kind of Dan's and my point that there are ways of practicing mindfulness that brings you immediately to the non-identification with consciousness because of how we're conceiving it. And that's where the passive voice.
But why isn't but again, in your view or in the Theravada view, consciousness isn't good enough. really.
No, okay, so this is the second point I was going to make.
Okay.
And here's where the difference in the view of nirvana is important. It's not just a philosophic distinction, because in the Dzogchen practice, as I understand it, we practice until this non-dual awareness is stabilized, and that it's the recognition of the nature of that mind, which is the union of clarity and emptiness. So that just becomes the understanding or the field in which life is taking place. And that is seen as the end point.
Except, but again, there is a slight, you have to hold that pretty lightly, because it really is from the point of view of Dzogchen, I mean, it's not quite like, it's not as heavy-handed as the Advaita tradition with the people like, Punjaji or Nisargadatta Maharaj, where they just castigate any efforts at meditation as being part of the illusion, right? And also there's some Zen teachers who have done similar, but it goes halfway there, which is to say that you're not meditating on anything. I mean, that's why they call it non-meditation. And they're very alert to the problem of trying to make it a practice, which is a natural way of misunderstanding what there is to notice, right? So you're not cultivating this thing. You're not trying to improve it. You're not using it as a tool. It's not a method. The path thereafter is not to overlook the way things already are, right? Like leave it as it is.
Right? I understand all that.
Okay,
that's
but
not the point I'm making.
99.9% of ordinary mindfulness practitioners, I would say, don't understand all that. That's
okay. Well, I'm in the exalted 1%.
Yes, I know you. I know you to be.
Yeah. So, but that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that the end goal is different. And because it's different...
What do you mean the end goal? The arhanship versus Buddhahood, or what are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is Rigpa, the union, the inseparability of clarity, which is awareness, and emptiness. That is the end point.
What's the other end point, and why have another end point, is my question to you.
Because the end point from the Theravada perspective, they would see that as still conditioned phenomena. And I'm not, at this point, I'm not arguing for one or the other. I'm just saying they are different understandings of the endpoint. And for Dzogchen, that's the endpoint. And in the Theravada understanding of the endpoint, it's the cessation of awareness itself.
This brings us back to where we started, but why not? So what is the pragmatic difference if you're resting in the non-dual condition of mindfulness without clinging to anything, including the sense of self? Why isn't that a sufficient? Even if it's from the Theravada point of view, if that's just conditioned phenomenon. Why isn't that a sufficient holding pattern awaiting the skandha nibbana that you still subtly hope is going to happen at some point in the future?
Because that...
it's equanimity, right? It's non-distraction and it's equanimity. What is lacking from your point of view as a matter of practice? If let's say Mahasi Sayadaw was right about everything, and you got to rub two sticks together fervently to make fire. Why isn't just resting in non-dual awareness of everything as it arises without clinging, this mindfulness sufficient unto the path of the progress of insight?
It could be. It depends on the understanding one has. And I think here kind of the metaphysical basis has some relevance. If one has the view that this is the ultimate reality, then there is no no either interest or elements in the mind which will be open to the cessation of it all. And this is borne out in the different practitioners in the different traditions. And so
what do you mean? Well, to say more about that, what do you mean it's borne out?
I think for Tibetan practitioners, cessation of it all is not even on the table. I mean, they think it's delusion, and they think it's a dead end and a black hole. And I mean, they don't talk about it at all. It's not even. It's not part of the whole.
That's why I feel like this matters. The metaphysics matters because it is self-confirming, and.
But on both sides, it's self-confirming.
Yeah, but that's what. But from the other side, I think it's possible to practice in the kind of Mahasi way and and have your repeated cessation experiences, and still not know how to practice Dzogchen. That's the problem I see, right? Like non-dual mindfulness is still not available even after stream entry, right? Or it's intermittently available, right?
It's as available to one of those practitioners as to a Dzogchen practitioner.
Well, no, it's not, because Dzogchen is synonymous with non-dual mindfulness. If you're not practicing non-dual mindfulness, you're not practicing Dzogchen. I'm saying that from the Theravada side, obviously you can practice mindfulness, not really emphasizing the non-duality of it, because all the language, all the concepts suggest. I mean, just what you did to Dzogchen. You said it's obvious that cessation's not important to these guys because they don't talk about it. And when you ask them about it, they roll their eyes and say, what do you get off that? There's more important things to talk about. I'll grant you that that's the view. But conversely, within the Theravada tradition, certainly within the Burmese tradition of Theravada, there's a resolutely dualistic view, if you want to find one, and all of your and what you've added to it with passive voice, etc., and other kind of Zen and Dzogchen, vibe shifts, is great for your students, but it's not. It does not discount the fact that it's possible to be a pure Theravada practitioner for whom all this non-duality talk doesn't make a lot of sense.
I think the back and forth is fascinating, but I would like us to just close on advice for listeners. People have heard all of this. They may be feeling insecure about their own practice because it's hopelessly dualistic. I would like to hear what each of you would have to say to a meditator who is intrigued by this discussion and trying to figure out what to do next in their own practice.
Okay, but I feel compelled to just have a little rejoinder.
Go for it.
And just
I'll
Sam,
cede my time back.
Yes,
I'll cede my time to Joseph. Yes.
Okay.
If one acknowledges that the endpoints are different, with respect to the Theravada view, there are many ways to the endpoint. And non-dual awareness, which I think comes automatically in the course of practice, and you may disagree with that, but it's my sense that understanding, because that non-duality is really just an expression of non-self. There's no self as subject. And that insight reveals itself very clearly at a certain point in Vipassana practice and is there. But there are, within the Theravada tradition, there are other means for reaching the final goal than emphasizing specifically non-duality. And that's why I think that kind of there is a commonality up to a certain point, and then there's a divergence because the endpoints are different. And in Dzogchen, there's a very direct pointing to an experience of the endpoint. In Theravada, it's not that. So there's a real difference there. And the difference is because the endpoint is different. And so it's just, again, not to claim one is better or worse or superior or not. It's to say, okay, what's the end point, and what is one's own aspiration? And people will have different aspirations, and so then they connect with the practice that um, supports uh, whatever final goal they're aspiring to.
I feel like I need to say something in response to that, but
this is never going to end, Dan. Because he's going to say something, and then I'm going to have to say something, and you're going to
whatever
go
you
even
say,
more
Sam,
gray than you are.
Whatever you say, please just keep in mind what's more important than defeating your nemesis here is serving the listener.
This does go to the question of why this matters and advice for the listener. Well, first of all, I don't think most people, or virtually anyone, is motivated by an abstract conception of an endpoint that may or may not be attractive to them. Right? It's not that people are shopping for descriptions of the goal and then finding a ton of motivation based on their favorite flavor of the goal as articulated by one tradition or another. It's much more the case that virtually everyone starts with this very compelling sense that they have a self and that that's a problem, right? And then the question is, what do you do from that starting point? And the immense power of Vipassana, the Theravada Vipassana, is that you can offer that person, that confused and suffering person, a practice that is totally straightforward and non-paradoxical, and it's just, here, do this, right? I understand where you're stuck. I understand how things seem to you. There's a few things you should notice right now, like, for instance, you're just spending all your time lost in thought, and you're so lost in thought you can't even notice that. So here, pay attention to the breath and see if you can do that. And notice how hard it is to do that. And now as you begin to train in that and begin to notice things, notice a few other things. Notice impermanence. Notice and notice how everything's impermanent. And now notice how you're getting a little more concentrated. And again, you can walk up from the bottom of the mountain here, or seem to, in a way that is not confusing. It's not easy. It can take years and years and years, and it can be very frustrating, et cetera, but it's not paradoxical. It's not Zen, it's not Dzogchen, it's not Advaita, it's not you're already free, it's not samsara, nirvana, or one, it's not you can't polish a brick into a mirror, it's not show me your mind and I'll pacify it. It's none of that, highfalutin bullshit. It's like going to the gym to get muscles, right? Like Arnold's, you got a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger on the wall. He did it. He's going to tell you how to do it. Just start lifting heavier objects, right? Eat more protein, lift heavy things. Non-paradoxical, right? That is its immense strength, but that is also its weakness, right? The weakness is it can keep someone feeling like they've got a problem to solve, and then now they know how to solve it, and that can endure for a very, very long time. And what I'm saying is that, in my experience, there is a shift that is available in how one experiences mindfulness, where mindfulness no longer becomes a practice. It no longer becomes a style of meditation. It no longer becomes a remedy for this apparent problem of clinging or selfhood or suffering, or it becomes a recognition of a prior condition, which is always already the case, which is just non-dual awareness or emptiness or whatever you want to call it. And it's available now, always, already, and it need not be snuck up on by virtue of any other sustained practice. It can just be recognized as just the ordinary state of consciousness in any present moment. And so I would just say, advice to the listener is that this can be a very frustrating thing to hear, and trying to make your experience of mindfulness non-dual can be frustrating, and all the teachings around that, which many of which can be found in over the Waking Up app, or in Dzogchen teaching, or in Advaita teaching. I mean, there's different flavors of methodology in talking about this, talking around this liminal moment of how dualistic mindfulness becomes non-dualistic mindfulness. I would just say that there is a difference there to be discovered, and on some level, I would say you shouldn't be satisfied until you're satisfied, right? There is use that frustration as a key to further inquiry, right? It's not, and I would say that frustration bears witness to this predicament, which is it is possible to practice dualistically for a very long time, and the frustration of that occasion is built in to the circumstance, because on some level, though you might want to encourage a very different vibe, the vibe is a kind of a superficial change in attitude. It doesn't really give you the freedom you're looking for until it does, right? And so so I would just, it's perhaps a bitter pill to swallow, but I would counsel honesty around the frustration, right? Honesty around the insufficiency of mindfulness if it feels insufficient, right? I mean, just again, everyone has to start somewhere. I'm not saying you don't start with dualistic mindfulness as virtually everyone does. Of course you do, right? I mean, it is the only preliminary practice to dualistic mindfulness. But I just think that it's appropriate to be frustrated if you still feel like you're working on a problem when you're meditating and when you're paying attention to the present moment.
Joseph, just in closing here, let's go back to your passive voice. I have heard from so many of people who show up at my events and are subscribers. When I talk about, I often will teach and give you full credit, this practice of, I'll do some sort of stabilization, concentration practice like loving kindness or focus on the breath. And then I'll open up to open awareness with the passive voice in there. And I hear from a lot of people like, I don't get it. And so I'm just curious, what's your advice to them? My advice generally is just keep knocking at the door generally, and you might see something interesting over time, but don't get too sweaty about it. Just keep trying it gingerly and persistently. Would you agree with that? And what else would you add?
No, I think that's good advice. And there are also a lot of other approaches. Everything we're discussing is really a skillful means. And just so kind of in my closing argument. So the teachings, the Theravada teachings, but I think this is true across all Buddhist traditions, or at least most of them, but certainly Dzogchen included. There's one sutta in which it says, nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine. Whoever understands this, realizes this, practices this, has realized all the teachings. So if we understand the I, an attachment to the I in one form or another, as being the basis of non-dual, of the basis of dualism, that separation of subject and object, right embedded in the Theravada teachings, it's just this very clear statement. In whatever way one is identified with awareness or knowing, that's a problem. And so nothing whatsoever is to be clung to or adhered to as I or mine is just the essence of it all. And what I'm suggesting is that there are many ways to come and realize that. And at different levels of realization, and just as Sam said, in Dzogchen and in Vipassana, there's a lot of practice one has to do to really fully embody that understanding. One thing that I think sometimes you don't acknowledge, Sam, is that even within classical Dzogchen teachings, there are a lot of different practices which are supportive for that non-dual awareness, which is the essence, of the pointing out. And to not acknowledge that they are actually a necessary part of reaping the benefits of the non-dual awareness, because unless there's the capacity in the mind and its qualities like mindfulness and like concentration, how often somebody without any of that background, without any of those qualities of mind, I think it would be extremely rare for people to actually remain or even remember non-dual awareness in the busyness of their lives. So one example, and this is something I love from Dujam Rinpoche, great Dzogchen master, when he talked about the undercurrent of thoughts, not the big dramatic thoughts, but just kind of a pretty steady stream of very light thoughts going through the mind throughout the day that we are mostly unaware of. And he called these the thieves of meditation, the thieves of non-dual meditation.
Yeah.
So for somebody who has not developed the capacity through mindfulness and some steadiness of mind, there is no way they're going to be aware of this undercurrent of thought. And it's very prevalent. And in all of those moments of undercurrent, which are not being recognized because they're very subtle, very light, people are not in non-dual awareness.
Yeah.
They are lost in those thoughts. And so what I'm suggesting is that I have a tremendous appreciation for kind of the Dzogchen teachings, and I benefit a lot from them. But they don't exist independent of all these supportive practices which make them possible, which make that aspect possible for people to really integrate in their lives. In just the same way, a lot of the Vipassana practice, what we call Vipassana practice, in the beginning, and the beginning can be a while, it is the development of a lot of these supportive practices. And there's a Dzogchen, I think Tulku Urgyen talked about this, and it's probably in the Dzogchen texts, where they talk about fabricated and unfabricated mindfulness. And fabricated is kind of what you're suggesting, I think, characterizes Vipassana, where there has to be kind of some effort made. And unfabricated mindfulness, where it's just there. There's no effort required. Well, in Vipassana, there is also that move from fabricated to unfabricated mindfulness. Okay, so that's being said. Then I agree with you that there can be subtle dualistic perceptions, just like the undercurrent of thought, that mostly go unrecognized, whether one's practicing Dzogchen or Vipassana. There are some really subtle, they're called cognitive distortions, and they're really explained quite definitively, although it can be a little difficult to unpack, in the very first discourse of the Middle End Sayings, where the Buddha is acknowledging and pointing out these very subtle cognitive distortions that may be unrecognized. So I agree with you, that can be there, but they are also addressed within the Theravada tradition. and one does have to penetrate through them. So now Sam is going to probably have to rebut something I just said. And then I'm going to have to...
The temptation is excruciating, Joseph.
But he will be the bigger man and let the other person.
I think this is
I will be the emptier man.
I think this is a fine place to end.
I will just express appreciation for the dialogue, Joseph.
Yeah.
Lo, these many
Well
years,
done,
we've
Sam.
gone round and round this track. Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
I'll express the same appreciation for the dialogue and for both of you.
So I would suggest something to the listeners,
Yeah.
Acknowledging that we've been having these discussions for years, and, sometimes with different flavors and this and that. What I would suggest is in whatever has been heard, and any thread of any of it that seems of interest, just to pursue that thread. Kind of don't have to kind of hold it all and try to figure out right and wrong. And if there's something in what was said that was helpful for the practice to relieve suffering in some way, go for it, and just explore and see where it leads.
Joseph and Sam, thank you both.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Dan.